I had been working the forge since before dawn, and by the time the rain began to fall across the street outside, the fire was already hot enough to carry me through the night. I had planned for a quiet evening at the anvil, but something about the rain felt different before I ever stepped away from the forge. The year is 1378, and I am a blacksmith. Sir Alden had arrived just before the rain began, his cloak already damp at the edges and his patience worn thin from the road. He had come for the sword I had promised him, the one he intended to carry into tomorrow's festival tournament, where he would stand again before the same crowd he had won over the year before. I had been finishing the final edge when he stepped inside. The blade had taken well to the work, balanced, clean, the fuller running true along its length, the steel holding a consistent temper without flaw. I gave it one last pass along the stone before turning it in my hands and offering it across. He took it without hesitation, testing the weight with a practiced motion. "Beautiful work as always, Rowan." He said it simply, as men like him often did, without exaggeration and without doubt. His grip settled easily along the hilt, and for a moment the forge held only the quiet between us and the steady fall of rain beyond the walls. "It will hold," I said. "It always does." He set a small pouch of coin on the table without counting it out and turned back toward the door, pausing only long enough to pull his cloak tighter around his shoulders. The rain had grown heavier in the time he had been inside, the sound of it pressing harder now against the roof and stone. "You'll be there tomorrow?" he asked, glancing back once. "If the work allows it." He gave a short nod, as if that were answer enough, and stepped back out into the street. The door closed behind him. Sir Alden had been the second to last customer of the night. The door had barely settled behind him before I turned back to the forge, knowing there was still one more piece to finish before the fire could rest. Sir Garrick would be arriving within the hour. He had sent word earlier that day, nothing more than a boy with coin and a short message. He would come after dusk, and he would not wait. That was enough. Men like him rarely repeated themselves, and I had learned not to keep them standing at my door. The axe I had been shaping for him rested near the coals, not yet finished, the edge still needing its final pass before it would hold properly. It was a heavier piece than the sword I had just handed off, built for force rather than balance, and it required a different kind of attention to finish it cleanly. Outside, the rain pressed harder against the street. I noticed it as I stepped closer to the forge again, the sound of it no longer something distant, but something constant, filling the space between each movement of the work. It struck the roof and stone in a steady rhythm that did not rise or fall, only continued. I increased the heat. The coals shifted as I drew them inward, feeding the center of the fire until the glow deepened and the temperature rose to where it needed to be. The axe went back into the heart of it, the steel taking on color as the heat returned evenly along its edge. The hammer followed. Strike, turn, strike. The work settled into place, as it always did. I had been a blacksmith for as long as I could remember, and there had never been a day where the rhythm of steel had not carried me through it. This time of year was always wet, the road slower, supplies delayed more often than not, but the work never stopped because of it. It couldn't. The forge had been in my family longer than I had been alive. My father had worked it before me, and his before him, each passing it down with more expectation than explanation. There had never been a question of whether I would take it on, only when. He had taught me early to listen to iron, not with ears, but through the way it resisted, the way it moved beneath the hammer when struck too soon or too late. Steel remembered what you did to it, he said. It held every decision. I turned the axe again, finishing the edge in a smooth, controlled line. It was good work. Ready! I set it aside and waited. Sir Garrick should have been close by then. Even in rain, a rider made sound. Hooves against stone, the shift of weight, a voice at the door before entering. There was always something. I heard nothing. I crossed to the door and opened it again. The street lay empty. Rain fell in the same steady lines as before, striking the stone without variation, gathering along the edges of the road and running in thin, consistent streams. No movement came from either direction. No lanterns burned in the windows across the lane. No sign of anyone approaching. I stepped out just far enough for the rain to reach me and looked down toward the turn that led to the square. Nothing. I stood there longer this time, expecting something to change, simply because it should have. It didn't. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The axe was finished. The fire held steady. Sir Garrick had not arrived, and the rain had not changed once since it began. I had just set the axe aside when the sound finally came. Not hooves, a knock. It landed firm against the door, measured, deliberate, but without the weight I would have expected from Garrick himself. I crossed the shop and opened it without delay. A courier stood in the rain. His cloak was soaked through, water running from its edges to the stone beneath his boots. He did not step inside, only waited just beyond the threshold. "Master Rowan," he said, "Sir Garrick sends word he will not be able to collect the piece himself this evening." That was enough to hold my attention. The courier reached beneath his cloak and produced a sealed note, the wax bearing Garrick's mark, unbroken despite the weather. In his other hand, he held a small purse, which he extended without hesitation. "For your time and the work." I took both. The weight of the coin felt right. I broke the seal and read the message quickly by the light of the forge. "Rowan, delayed beyond the city. The roads have slowed more than expected. The axe will be needed regardless. Send it with the bearer, payment included. I will see you after the festival." No explanation beyond that. I folded the note once and set it aside. "The piece is ready." The courier nodded. I crossed the shop, lifted the axe, and carried it back to the door. The balance held clean in my hand, the edge set exactly where it needed to be. I passed it to him, and he took it carefully, both hands steady. No wasted movement, no hesitation. He stepped back into the rain and turned immediately, his figure fading quickly into the darkened street until there was nothing left but the sound of his steps. And then, not even that. I remained where I was, looking out into the street. There was no reason to stay there. Still, I did. The lane stretched in both directions, empty, the rain falling in the same steady pattern it had held since it began. No lanterns burned, no doors opened, no movement followed the courier's departure. Nothing changed. I closed the door and turned back toward the forge, but stopped before reaching it. The note rested where I had left it. The coin sat beside it, untouched. The fire held low and steady, casting the same glow across the stone. I listened. The rain had not shifted. Not in sound, not in weight, not in rhythm. I crossed to the door again and opened it once more. The street was the same. No sign of the courier. No trace of footsteps. Only the rain, falling without change. And for the first time that evening, I realized I could not remember when it had started. I woke to the sound of rain before I opened my eyes. It had not changed. The same steady fall carried through the walls of the shop and into the loft above, as constant as it had been the night before. For a moment, I lay still, listening, expecting some shift in it with the passing of time, but it held the same rhythm, without interruption. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, low and drawn out, not sharp enough to break the pattern, only settling beneath it. I sat up. The fire below had held through the night, stronger than I had left it, the warmth rising through the floor with more presence than usual. I had banked it hotter than I normally would, expecting to begin work early, and it had done exactly what I intended. That, at least, remained as expected. I crossed to the window. The street below lay dim beneath the morning light, though the sky had not fully broken into day. Rain fell in the same steady lines, striking stone without variation, gathering along the edges of the lane and running in narrow streams that followed the slope of the road. There were still no voices, no movement. I watched for a moment longer than necessary before turning away. There was work to do. I made my way down the stairs, the wood warm beneath my feet, and stepped back into the shop. The forge greeted me first, its heat steady and ready, the coals holding a strong, even glow without needing to be stirred. I set my hands to the work without hesitation. Armor today. Not a full set, but enough to matter. Plates that would need shaping, fitting, adjusting to match what had already been made. It was slower work than blades, less forgiving in some ways, and it required a steadier hand to keep everything true. I selected the first piece of metal and brought it closer to the forge. As I worked, my thoughts drifted in the way they often did when the rhythm settled into place. I had grown up in this shop, not just around it, but within it. The forge had been part of every day I could remember, its heat as familiar as the sound of my own breath. My father had stood where I stood now, his movements slower than mine, but never uncertain, his hands marked by years of the same work. He had never rushed anything, even when others demanded it. Steel does not care how quickly you need it, he would say. only how well you treat it. I had learned that early, learned it the hard way more than once. There had been a time when I tried to move faster than the work allowed, when I believed strength alone could shape what patience required. The results had not held. Cracks where there should have been none. Edges that failed when tested. Pieces that had to be remade entirely. He had not been angry when it happened, only quiet. That had been worse. I adjusted the metal in the heat, watching the color change as it began to take on the temperature it needed. The glow settled evenly across its surface, and I drew it back out, placing it against the anvil. The hammer followed, measured, controlled. Each strike placed with intention. The rhythm returned easily. It always did. There had been no other path for me, not truly. The forge had been in the family long before I was born, and it had never been a question of whether I would take it on, only when I would be ready to do so without guidance. The day that came, my father had stepped aside without ceremony. No speech, no instruction, just space. I had taken his place at the anvil, and the work had continued as it always had. I turned the metal again, flattening it further, shaping it to the form it would need to hold. The sound of the hammer carried through the shop, steady and familiar, though even now I found myself listening between the strikes. The rain had not changed, not once. I paused just long enough to notice that, then continued, the hammer falling again with the same controlled force. Outside, the thunder rolled again, distant and low, though the rain beneath it did not shift in response. It simply continued. I set the first piece aside and reached for the next. The work moved forward. It had to. I could not stand still simply because something beyond the walls felt different. The metal in my hands responded as it should, taking shape under the hammer, flattening, bending, forming into something that would hold once finished. The process was the same as it had always been, each step leading to the next without deviation. And yet, something about the morning did not follow the same order. I noticed it in small ways at first. The light, it had not brightened, not as it should have by then. The rain, still the same, unbroken. I set the hammer down for a moment and looked toward the door. Listened. Nothing beyond the rain. No voices beginning the day. No carts. No movement at all. I stood there briefly, then reached for the metal once more. Work first, questions later. I lifted the piece and placed it into the heart of the forge, watching as the heat began to take hold once more. Then I picked up the hammer again and began shaping what came next. The hammer settled into its rhythm again, each strike landing where it needed to, the metal responding cleanly beneath my hands. The work moved forward as it always did, one step into the next, each piece taking shape in time with the heat. And still, the rain did not change. It had been there when I woke. It had been there through the first piece, the second, and now into the third. The same sound, the same weight, the same steady fall against the stone beyond the walls. I paused again, longer this time, not because the work required it, but because something within the morning did. The light had not shifted. I had noticed it before, but only in passing. Now it held my attention fully. The shop should have been brighter by then. The sky should have broken through the clouds, even if only faintly. There should have been some difference between early morning and what should have come after. There was none. The same dim light held its place, unchanged since I had come down from the loft. I set the hammer down, crossed to the door, opened it once more. The street lay exactly as it had. Rain falling, stone darkened, water moving in thin lines along the edges of the road. No voices, no movement, no sign that the city had woken at all. I stepped out further than I had before, letting the rain settle fully across my shoulders as I looked down the length of the lane. The houses stood where they always had, their shapes familiar, their doors closed, their windows dark. No smoke rose from chimneys, no sound carried from within. I turned slowly, looking in the other direction. Nothing. The same, unchanged. I remained there for a time, though I could not have said how long, watching the rain as it continued without pause, without shift, without any sign of ending. Then I stepped back inside, closed the door. The forge still burned. The heat still held. The work remained waiting. I stood there, just within the shop, listening once more as the sound of the rain filled the space beyond the walls, exactly as it had from the moment it began. It had not weakened. It had not strengthened. It had not changed at all. I crossed back to the anvil, picked up the hammer. The metal still waited where I had left it, the shape unfinished, the work not yet complete. I lifted it, turned it once in my hand, and set it back against the surface of the anvil. There was nothing else to do. The work did not stop, because the world outside had settled into something I could not explain. It continued, as it always had. I placed the metal into the forge again, watching as the heat took hold, the color rising slowly across its surface until it reached the point it needed to be. Then I drew it back out, set it in place, and brought the hammer down once more. The sound rang clean through the shop, steady and controlled, filling the space with something familiar. Outside, the rain continued, unbroken, and for as long as I remained at the forge, it did not stop.